It's funny how things work out sometimes. Initially, I had planned this edition of Doom Mod Madness to feature the Bikini Bottom Massacre, featuring one completely homicidal and cracked Squidward as he goes on a murderous rampage through Bikini Bottom itself. But, as the fates would have it, the owners of the SpongeBob property were not particularly happy to see their IP used in this particular way. So, hello DMCA jail. Goodbye, Bikini Bottom Massacre. It's never all that great having to give up on the idea of covering a mod, be it for personal or legal reasons, but in any case, I went searching for something a little different. And by sheer coincidence, I managed to stumble on a mod by the name of Space Cat Saga. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. Just the kind of adrenaline-soaked gameplay that I crave. Just injected directly into my eyeballs. In terms of setup, this puts you in the shoes of Khitan Commander Aimee. Not Amy, Aimee. Trust me, I checked. It's in the readme. Anyway, big demon-infested spaceship shows up, and of course, it's your job to go deal with it. Now, in most other mods, the starting pistol isn't going to be all that much to write home about, but here it is a delightful surprise. It's an absolute powerhouse. Its primary fire is pleasingly hefty in terms of feel and damage output, not to mention it's semi-auto, properly semi-auto, so it'll fire as fast as you can click. Now, of course, mentioning primary fire suggests that there's a secondary, and oh boy is there ever. This one transforms it into a full auto death dealer. It requires a little bit of wind-up time, and it doesn't fire as fast as it possibly could to begin with, but if you hold down that fire button, it rapidly ramps up to full speed. And trust me when I say, this thing is more than capable of mowing down a room full of lesser enemies. In all honesty, it is just a fantastic starting weapon, one that works admirably as fallback too during the course of the 10 or so main levels here in Space Cat Saga Chapter 1. And part of the reason why it's so useful, beyond being reasonably powerful, is the fact that it also features a recharging energy pool. You'll be able to see this in action in the bottom right hand corner of the HUD, and whenever I'm not actively firing, it will recharge. And this is intriguing for the fact that it's not just the pistol that takes advantage of this energy pool. It's something that also carries on to the rest of the weapons that you'll discover here further on down the line. Second level transports you to the demon-infested ship proper, and also introduces you to the shotgun, which in a phrase is, well, punchy as all heck. And happily you'll find that this kind of punchiness follows throughout the majority of the Space Cat Saga weapon roster here, because in all honesty, it's one thing to have weapons that look cool. It's entirely something else to have them feel cool. Speaking of which, have I introduced you to the laser cannon yet? Because boy oh boy does this thing thump. Oh, and by the way, there's the secondary fire, which utilizes that aforementioned recharging energy pool to go absolutely turbo. Seriously though, this second level is somewhat an embarrassment of riches when it comes to weaponry, because a little later you'll also acquire the hand cannon. This occupies the super shotgun slot, and curiously, doesn't take advantage of that recharging energy pool. That's because the secondary fire is dedicated entirely to making you feel like an absolute badass. It's entirely understandable at this point that you may begin to worry that Space Cat Saga is tipping ever so slightly into the more OP side of the spectrum when it comes to combat, but that's where the benefits of this mod having its own custom campaign come into focus. I've always been a fan of the idea of having curated map sets to pair up with specific gameplay mods. It's why I quite enjoy the concept of Final Doomer, which does a similar kind of thing, but retroactively, creating curated weapon sets for specific maps such as Ancient Aliens and Plutonia. And it's that similar feeling of pleasing balance that's also achieved here in Space Cat Saga. I guess what I'm really trying to say here is that even though the weaponry makes you feel thoroughly badass, this mod still isn't afraid to kick your head in if you get a little too complacent. Third map, Ghost Ship, eventually gives way to the ostentatiously named Necrophantasia, and I have fond memories for this one, if only for the fact it's where I got my dual laser rifles. This was thanks to the fact that I did pick up a single laser rifle in a preceding level, nestled somewhere within a secret, but two of these puppies, oh, yes please. This level is also where I discovered that the melee option here is actually viable. Not to mention, pretty goddamn spiffy if you've managed to bag yourself a Berserk kit. It also helps that you've got cool laser talons, which don't just rely on you needing to be face to face with an enemy to actually punch them. This does have a little bit of range to it, and yes, much like the other weapons, has an ult, which does a cross slash that extends even further. Lesser enemies can be pleasingly jibbed, and honestly, I'm just surprised to see a decent melee option. Always nice. Next map goes by the name of Force Your Way, which I'm reasonably sure is a Final Fantasy VIII reference. It also appears to be some kind of sewer. Not sure if that's a way to throw some subtle shade at the game, but all I'll say on my part is Triple Triad is great, and the draw system sucks. Pretty straightforward map to begin with, visiting the east and west wings of this opening section in order to flip switches, have a little bit of a tussle with barons in a poison pit, and then move on to an introductory encounter at the midpoint of the map against a, what do you call it when an Arachnotron doesn't have the legs anymore? Either way, you get a pretty goddamn sweet rocket launcher for your trouble. I mean, just look at the animation on this thing as it fires. It is glorious. Secondary's not too shabby either, sending a slice of flaming death careening through any enemies unfortunate enough to be stood in your way, and much like the hand cannon, doesn't actively take advantage of the energy pool. This seems to be a running theme with some of the higher tier weaponry here in Space Cat Saga, because they're just outright powerful enough to speak for themselves. The BFG cannon, for example, pretty much deletes enemies from existence with its primary, save for the gently steaming pile of gore on the floor, and as for its secondary, well, how does the prospect of an energy minigun sound? Because to me, it sounds pretty goddamn great. You may be wondering how exactly you'd balance for such a weapon being introduced into the roster at this point. After all, this is still only about halfway through the map set, and once again the benefit of having created your own set of levels to go along with the weaponry rears its head, because ammo limitation here means that you can't always rely on being able to delete your enemies from existence. Instead, it encourages you to run your way down the arsenal, and of course, if you do go a little too ham with some of them, the handgun is always ever present and available. There's also the dilemma of choice for the player at this point, because at the upper echelon of the weaponry here, they all draw from the same type of ammo pool, which are the non-rechargeable energy cells. So really it just depends on how big a dent you want to make per shot. BFG cannon, for example, hoovers up 20 energy cells per primary, whereas its secondary acts on a more 1 point per projectile basis. If anything, it does somewhat make the laser rifles feel redundant, but that said, you can't always discount the inherent cool factor of being able to dual wield, and that's saying something when so many of the weapons in this mod already feel cool as heck. After wading through the rivers of blood that constitute the end of Force Your Way, we move on to the next level, Space Shift. This one starts off in a fun way, having you actually thoroughly submerged in the aforementioned blood. Had to admit, it took me a few seconds to actually figure that out, the light bulb moment being when I actually tried to fire my weapons, which fantastically are more than durable enough to handle blood gumming up the machinery. And after that, it's a pretty enjoyable romp through a level that is decidedly more hell than Spaceship at this point, but that's the nice thing about the theming here in Space Cat Saga. It's not something that comes out of the blue, it's something that's been introduced steadily throughout the course of the preceding levels. In terms of new weapon acquisitions, this level provides us with what I've taken to calling the Cryo Rifle, and it is a bit of a dud, personally speaking. It takes up the chainsaw slot, and the encounter with which it's presented to you does not do it any favors. It's honestly a real odd duck of a weapon to me, because it takes the secondary cryo shot of the shotgun, which, in all honesty, isn't all that effective against anything above an imp, makes it rapid fire, which sadly doesn't really add all that much to it, and then offers you the primary fire of the pistol as a secondary, which you can use in tandem. And that actually turns out to be the most useful part of it, but even then it just feels kind of pointless. I don't know, it just sticks out like a sore thumb. And like I said, the encounter in which it appears does it absolutely zero favors, because during the course of this level, things get pretty spicy indeed. I mean, it's not just those rocketless revenants, you've also got barons, you've got arachnotrons, you've got regular revenants filtering into the mix, demons, and then, of all things, this is where it starts dropping cyber demons into the fray. Yeah, this is a level where you very much start to feel the building of momentum as it starts to careen towards its final levels. It's ready, willing, and able to say, alright, you've got a grasp of these weapons, let's see how it goes when we start making things a little more, let's say, slaughtery. In that regard, the opening of follow-up level Keeper of Imbalance is an absolute doozy. Stuffed to the gills with enemies during the course of this opening corridor, but likewise giving you ample opportunity to plug away with wonderful weaponry such as the hand cannon here. Once you've cleared that opening corridor, however, the level does settle into more of a standard groove. That, of course, being large, open, arena-esque spaces that you'll progressively unlock during the course of the map itself, and will inevitably see you contending with the onslaught of enemies that filter in via teleport. Gets decidedly fleshy at its midpoint as you progress through this map, but that shouldn't be a surprise considering the more hellish detours the previous maps have taken. After that, it neatly loops you back around into more recognizably ship-based confines, whereupon it treats you to a entertaining mosh pit of a climactic encounter. The enemies just keep on filing in, and once you've dealt with enough of the riffraff, that central column will open up, revealing what else but a handful of archviles and another one of those Octobrain wannabes from earlier. Somewhat unfortunately, the sheer degree of corpses strewn across this arena meant that I didn't spot the shipwrecker until I had thoroughly dispatched most of the major enemies here, but boy oh boy, does this ever feel like a weapon that could easily punch holes in the hull of a spaceship. Living up to the name, I guess. That said, appearances can be somewhat deceiving. For all of its beef, it doesn't actually feel, in primary at least, like it takes down enemies anywhere near as effectively as the primary of the BFG cannon. If anything, the secondary is the only way you should be using this. It's got a much faster fire rate, much higher utilization of energy cells, and in general just feels much more true to its name. If anything, it raises the question of whether or not every weapon here needs to have a secondary. Bit of a dilemma for that weapon slot, actually, having two weapons on it. Personally, I'd say bump the Shipwrecker up to its own dedicated slot, make that secondary fire mode the primary, and just let the thing shred. As far as levels go, Flesh Ship tends to smush together somewhat in my memory, which seems somewhat appropriate considering the smushing together of themic elements throughout. And in general, just has a little bit of everything. It's got a few claustrophobic encounters, a few run-and-gun corridor sections, and a midpoint encounter that is pleasingly hectic. Upon flipping this switch, you're ambushed by a bunch of archviles from the rear, forcing you out into the arena proper, and naturally, all hell breaks loose. I just quite enjoy how this section continuously piles on the pressure. Not only do you have those enemies rifling in from the open compartments to the side, but those archviles to the rear also teleport out onto plinths in the middle of the arena, so there's no real safe spot. You can, of course, take advantage of line of sight cover, but I just like the way it forces you to stay on your toes. I actually preferred this encounter in comparison to the encounter that actually closes the map out, which is a much wider open space, but just, in my opinion, winds up being oops all cacos. Penultimate map, Dehumanized, is interesting in terms of layout. It starts off in a relatively linear yet wide and airy starship space before plunging into more hell-adjacent environs as you reach its rear sections. This is where it opens up somewhat, and it's certainly where the meat of this level resides. It's certainly a level that wants you to keep on the move. Sections like this, for example, having lowering platforms that will reset your progress if you're not quick enough crossing them, and if you spend too long dilly-dallying in some of the more open sections, you're liable to be hit with a flurry of fireballs coming at you from many directions. In terms of progression, this section is largely concerned with acquiring 3 separate skull keys, each of which taking you a little further down the line, the red one in particular forming an entertaining spot of choose your own misadventure. And somewhere along the way I also managed to acquire this alternate slot weapon for the rocket launcher, which is pretty much the Flame Arc alt with an additional flamethrower secondary. So, you know, just more fire. Fire for everybody! Things become a little bit more conventional in pursuit of the blue skull key. Well, aside from having to deal with the archviles and the epilepsy tunnel. Oh, and let's not forget that section just chock full of mancubuses and revenants. But regardless, you'll eventually have all the skulls of power and find yourself looped rather neatly back to that opening, wide corridor section. And guess what's waiting for you? That's right, a gangbang of cyber demons. Luckily, I had protection. Final map, Demonium Spatium, or Spatium. I don't know, it seems Latin, maybe it just means demon space. If anything, I'd say this map doesn't really get spicy up until the point you get the red keycard and finally move on past this opening section, which by all accounts feels oddly pedestrian in comparison to the rest of it. Regardless, things begin to heat up nicely in pursuit of the yellow skull key. Certainly worth clearing out the riffraff before you pick up the key, because naturally a crapload more are going to teleport in directly afterwards, and then it's off to the front end of the ship where things absolutely pop the heck off. This is a big encounter, dare I say chunky, and you know it's going to be especially chunky when there's an invincibility sphere somewhere within the arena. All considered, this is a pretty fun fight, essentially holding off the hordes up until the point the transporter at the back of the room here is good and ready. As far as I can tell, you don't have to explicitly murder 100% of the enemies that spawn here before the transporter's active. If anything, I think it's tied to a certain quantity of those Octobrain wannabes, but even then, the blasting's too much fun, so I just killed everything anyway. Regardless, after the shootings finally stopped, you'll get to pass through the transporter and go straight to hell, because this level ain't done yet. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't feeling ever so slightly exhausted by the time I reached this point, but hey, the blasting's still good, and the ammo is still in plentiful supply, so why the heck not? Mercifully, only a few chambers here stand in the way of you and your final objective, with this second one here probably feeling the trixiest. It's got these little partitions breaking up line of sight across the area, but it's also got grates that are shoot-throughable, meaning that you can occasionally be caught off guard by something like a rogue fireball or even the occasional archvile plume. Final chamber is about as hectic as you can expect, but if you want the real secret to conquering this one in double quick time, aim for the Octobrain wannabe. Once that thing goes down, that central platform will lower and you've got a ticket right back out. But yeah, weaving your way around the enemies in pursuit of that is still quite a lot of fun. Once you've had your fill of mayhem, however, it's back to that OG ship that you started on before realizing that if this is chapter 1, of course that means there's going to be a chapter 2. Oh, and a bonus map! Welcome to Encore. This is basically here to catch all of those people that complain about the rest of the maps not being anywhere near slaughtery enough for their tastes, because oh man, this is going to be enough for anybody. But that said, I might as well use the chaos unfolding in this level to sum up how I feel about Space Cat Saga Chapter 1 as a whole. It's fine, I guess. No, I'm joking. It's absolutely fantastic. Really nice complementary map and encounter design to go along with that weapon roster, and a visual style that is actually quite pleasingly vibrant. I feel like a lot of people underestimate how difficult it can be to play with color like this and not have everything clash in some god-awful way. But here, it works. There's also a few little sprite tweaks across certain enemies, and no doubt that's in an effort to make everything mesh a little cohesively on that front too. But overall, yeah, really strong showing, and tremendous polish throughout. It's not just the color palette, it's not just the raw construction of the levels themselves, or the weapons for that matter, but also the little touches sprinkled throughout, flickering displays, the way certain doors open. It's all just damn good shit. So yeah, you should go play it. And if you're interested, the link, as usual, is in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments. And until next time, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.